Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano Macias, and today I'm probably going to get some of you mad. I am not joking. Granted, I don't know, maybe I'd hope that my audience would be open to different opinions, but one of my most unpopular opinions, I don't think Avatar The Last Airbender is a good show. I don't think Korra, the other Avatar show, is good. And today's subject, Avatar Aang The Last Airbender, which is the movie based on the first show, is honestly the worst movie I've seen all year. Sorry. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. So here's a little background. Avatar The Last Airbender came out around, 2005, 2006, and it was a show that never really grabbed my interest. I had already seen a lot of anime growing up. I had had my fill of action-oriented cartoons. And not that I didn't like action-oriented cartoons or anime by that point. I'll explain that in a little bit. But this was during my teen years. Pretty much I had just turned like around 13 when this came out. And yeah, I just wasn't all that interested because it's like, well, yeah, I've already seen Dragon Ball Z. I've already seen Sailor Moon. I've already seen, we had a lot of shonen anime coming out around this point. This was around the time that there was a big boom where like Naruto, One Piece, and whatnot were coming to the States. And, it was one of those things where it was just like, well, I've already seen so much of this stuff. Like, Teen Titans, the '03 series had, of course, already been around. So I had already seen American shows try to do the anime aesthetic. As a result, Avatar really did nothing for me because it was like, well, I've already seen that. And I was kind of getting tired of anime because there was so much of it. And of course, it's one of those things where, like, as a teen, even as a young teen, you kind of start feeling like you're a little rebellious and you're like, yeah, this is whatever. So it didn't really do much for me. And there was, of course, other action shows that I had already seen, like Batman the Animated Series, Beast Wars. So there was like nothing really for me to latch onto. As a result, it just did nothing for me. It also didn't help that I just didn't really care for the story of Avatar. I was always constantly like, well, why is Firebenders like? Because it's like, okay, for those of you who somehow don't know anything about Avatar: The Last Airbender, the whole premise of the show is that there's people who are called benders who basically, depending on what region they're from, they're able to control certain elements of the world. So there's like, your airbenders, you got your firebenders, you got your waterbenders, and you got your earthbenders, basically the elements. And in this world, the firebenders have essentially been trying to conquer everything else. They've already pretty much wiped out the airbenders except for one, which is, funny enough, the Avatar. And the Avatar is basically the one person in this whole world who is granted the ability to basically bend all the elements. He's supposed to be like the great peacekeeper, the one who brings balance to the world. But as a result of this kid, who was the new bender, because there's always one in every generation, running away, it resulted in the firebenders just basically taking over the world for like 100 years or whatever. Once the airbender comes back because he was frozen, he has to basically learn the other elements and right his wrong by essentially saving the world from the firebenders. And right from the get-go, I was always kind of like, why is it the firebenders that are like the real threat? Because like when you think about it, like shouldn't water or even earth be a much deadlier force? Like fire is viewed as like the very violent element, but it's like, I don't know. I just feel like there's more that you can do with the other elements that would be much more threatening in the long run compared to fire. But that's the nitpicky side of me. Like, as an adult, that stuff doesn't matter to me anymore. Other things that I just didn't care about was just the fact that a lot of the characters I just did not find all that interesting. The only characters that in this show I ever found that I really did like was Zuko, which is the son of like the Fire Lord. Basically goes through a whole arc where he learns, wrong from right and all of that stuff. His Uncle Iroh, who was voiced by Mako, and basically his whole thing was that he was already kind of like a few steps ahead. He was already kind of aware that this was wrong, but he was like, okay, well, I'm kind of going along with it because that's kind of the life that is there, and he's like trying to be the one that teaches his son, like teaches Zuko, like, hey, this stuff is not great, but whatever. And eventually, when they introduced Toph, which is like one of the best characters in the show, because it's like, hey, look, here's a blind character who controls the earth, and she is just no nonsense, but also kind of funny. And everyone else is just kind of hit or miss with me. The cute animals are cute animals, but it's like whatever. Aang to me is just an annoying kid. Katara is just the annoying love interest, and Sokka tries to be the funny, comedic relief, but he's more annoying than anything. And that a big portion of why I just did not like the show and just do not vibe with it is that the comedy to me just feels forced. Like a lot of people have often complained about something like the MCU having forced humor, and I'm like, if you think this is forced, wait until you see Avatar: The Last Airbender out. Like you'll have times where serious stuff is going down, and then they'll break it with a silly kids joke that is just so bad. And I feel like I don't know. I feel crazy every time I bring this up because a lot of people don't seem to mind it. But I'm like, no, this is kind of what they would do on it. Like, yeah, I know that the MCU does this a lot too. Like, you can find any example of this through their various movies from like Black Widow, Guardians of the Galaxy, or whatever. But even with those, I feel like they kind of build up to those moments a little bit easier, or at least they put it in spots where it doesn't feel like it's all that bad. And regardless of it, I can't deny that a lot of them often are actually funny jokes. So it's like, I don't really mind. With this show, it's often like stuff would happen and it would be like just killing the mood. And it doesn't help because it's not even funny jokes. It just does not help. I don't know. I just feel like everything that the show was doing, I had already seen before. I remember someone mentioning that for a lot of people, the reason why they like it so much is because it was like the first example of a Western cartoon that was trying to do like some big serialized story, which I'm like, I mean, I guess I kind of understand that, but at the same time, it's like if you've seen anime, which there was plenty of at that time, you probably would have been exposed to that kind of stuff already. And for me personally, in terms of Western cartoons, the show Beast Wars was already kind of doing that too, a decade before this with storylines that would be gradually built up to. It's just that it wasn't as, heavy on the serialization as this was, but it was still there. I don't know. It just did nothing for me. A lot of the stuff just felt generic. It felt like I had seen it before. The entire second season's finale reminds me of Empire Strikes Back with the whole idea of like, hey, look, here's Aang having to be taught by this master bender guy or whatever. And then he finds out that his friends are in trouble, and he's told like, you're supposed to ignore them. You're supposed to stay here. If you leave, you will never finish your training. It's basically Empire Strikes Back. But again, this is just my thoughts on the show. What about the movie? What exactly makes the movie, in my eyes, worse, and in my eyes, just the absolute worst movie I've seen in 2026? And in a word, it's rushed. It feels very rushed for something that they've been talking about for years, for something that apparently is a story that they've thought of for a while. They really don't go through it with much of the weight that it deserves to have. Like, you can feel okay, for perspective's sake, the whole point of the movie is that Aang, these characters are now older. Aang has basically spent his time gathering up like artifacts from his people, and they've built this city that is supposed to be home to every kind of bender. So it's pretty much like, an elemental city similar to that of the movie Elemental, only with people, which, whatever. And along the way, it turns out that there's this group of people who don't like benders because of all the stuff that the Fire Nation did, which, fair. And they decide to attack Aang to get a map to this supposed relic that can grant people bending powers, which is already kind of weird because it's like, well, if you don't like benders, why would you want to get something that would give you bending powers? This sounds kind of hypocritical, but whatever. along the way, they meet this other airbender who had been frozen for much longer than Aang was. And it's all about, like, okay, meeting these people, getting to know a little bit more about the airbending people, and action stuff happens. And that's kind of it. And it feels like there's never enough room for any of this to breathe. A lot has been said about this movie regarding the voice acting. And I just want to say that I don't really have a problem with the voice acting in Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender. I just don't. I understand that they replaced a lot of the characters from the TV show with other actors. They all do fine. I mean, I'm a little weirded out at the fact that Dante Bosco wasn't one of the ones that came back just because he actually is Asian, but I guess they were just like, look, we gotta keep it to new people or something, whatever. I don't know. There's only one actor that actually came back, and it's the guy who does the sound effects for the animals. Fun. But again, I don't have a problem with this. I feel like a lot of the people who have a problem with this are mostly just people who are always mad about the fact that white voice actors are losing out roles to non-white actors, even though they're not really. It's just like, hey, look, we're gonna try to have more people of said backgrounds voice these characters just for authenticity, which there's a whole thing on that. I'd rather not get into it. But in this case, I don't have a problem with it. I feel like it works for whatever they're trying to do. It's not my problem. Again, like I was saying earlier about the comedy, I have more of an issue with the comedy than I do with any of this stuff because I'm like, they do get some, let's say, big name actors, in here. I mean, it's people that have done voice work before, but like, yeah, Kihi Kwan, for example, appearing as one of the older avatars when Aang is trying to find information on something. And it's like, okay, why are we doing a bunch of jokes about feet? Like, he's all talking about cuticles and whatnot, and it's like, this is supposed to be like a quirky thing, I guess, but it's just more annoying than it is useful, and it kind of stops like a whole, because the whole point of that scene is that Aang is looking for information about an old airbender, like the past avatars, if they know anything about it. And it's, I wouldn't say it's interesting, but it's like, okay, well, at least it's like a neat little mystery scene where it's like, okay, we're gonna have him talk to people. The entire time I'm just thinking, man, this thing is just really annoying. Taika Waititi shows up in this, and it's like, all the jokes that people make about how annoying Taika Waititi is, the stuff where it's like, oh, he's like riffing on a level that's sublime or whatever. This movie feels like that. Like, he's only in there for like a couple of minutes, but for the short time he's there, I'm just like, look, I like Taika Waititi. I think that a lot of people give him a bad rap, especially when it comes to the characters he plays. And even I was thinking like, oh god, shut this guy up. Like, the only performance that to me really stood out in a positive way is just Dave Bautista, who plays the villain of the movie, Taga. And that's mostly because they keep him mostly serious for the most part. And it's like, I wish this was more in this tone. Like, I'm not saying that you have to erase the comedy, but at the very least, if you're gonna make it a comedic, you gotta have it more natural, or at the very least, make it funny. Because it's just random for random's sake, and it's not even funny. It's, like I said, you can complain about the MCU all you want, but at the very least, most of it is built up a little bit better when it comes to the humor, or even when it's not, it at least is done in a way where it's actually funny. But yeah, like, you have this Taga character who is supposed to be like a mirror to Aang about, being like the last airbender, and he teaches Aang, you know, the ways of their people, but it turns out that he's evil because he's from a time period where the airbenders were at war with like earthbenders. His whole mindset is like, look, these people are always trying to kill us. Why do we have to, bend the knee for them? Why can't we just, get rid of them and show them that airbenders are actually a threat? And it's like, okay, this is interesting stuff. Shame the movie doesn't really let it breathe. At only 90 minutes, this movie is throwing so much that everything just kind of happens. Like, a lot of people have complained about like the Mario Brothers movies, which I do kind of understand those complaints about how rushed they are. But I'm like, look, those movies are at least simple. They're not trying to be anything complex. This movie is trying to give you, thoughts about racism, about how, a group of people feel persecuted and want to fight back. The deniers or denied, whatever they're called, who are pretty much people who don't have bending powers, who want to strike back at those who have bending powers for ruining their lives. And it's like these are all interesting ideas, but they're really not given any room to really breathe. And the choices they make is just weird. Like again, those denied people end up gaining bending abilities through the staff that they find, and it's just like, why? Like, wouldn't it have been more interesting if the staff could also take away the powers if you're gonna do this? Or more or less, you should have just removed these characters or altered them a bit to just make them treasure hunters who were just looking for the stuff, not really planning to use it for anything other than to make money, which would have had the same effect. And you could still get Dave Bautista to give them airbending powers at the end as a way of being like, hey, you guys are interested in stuff, so you know, I'll make you my army, which is what he basically does, except that again, it's like, wait, if you guys hate benders, wouldn't you be opposed to this? It's just so weird. And think about the voice acting. It doesn't help that there's a lot of characters in here that really don't add much to the story. Like Zuko and Toph, who I do really like, are still okay in this, but at the same time, it's like Toph has nothing to do. Zuko's uh, big addition to this whole story is just that he provides a ship for them to go through, but it's like we really didn't need that. Even Sokka is only kind of there just to have like a whole joke about an invention of his, and well, then you got Katara and Aang who have just never been really all that interesting to me, and continue just being boring to me in this. So I don't know. I just don't see what the point of doing all that was for. There's no room for it to breathe. So it's like, any ideas that they're trying to display, like, hey, look, let's have Taga try to manipulate Aang by telling him like, hey, why are you still friends with someone who is of the group that tried to kill your people and honestly successfully killed all your people except you? And why should I be friends with this earthbender if in my time earthbending was bad? Like, you feel like there should have been something there to really build off of, but there isn't really much beyond him just saying these things. Do you think that with Sokka being around, he would try to sway Sokka into also being into his side by being like, hey, look, I started off life without bending powers. You're not a bender, and people, treat you like a joke because of it. What if I could give you some bending powers and we could work together? It just feels like there's a lot here that's missing, and it's at the cost of telling a story that should be good, but just ends up being the most generic trash I'll see all year. So, not liking the voice work, not liking the story. Does the animation at least redeem it? And to that, I say no. Obviously, it does not. But I will say this: the animation is fine. It's not earth shattering, but as far as 2D projects go, it's decent. It's got some nice colors to it, a nice rhythm to it. The action is okay. It's nothing really all that spectacular. I've seen people try to hype it up as like some of the best animated action ever, and I'm like, this is no different than watching your typical TV shonen or whatever. Like, it's a little more fluid, sure, but for the most part, it's like, I mean, I've seen Goku and Frieza fight. This is not really as crazy as you guys want to make it out to be. It's not all that unique, even though it is a better looking thing than the cartoon, the TV series counterpart. It's still in that range where it's like, I mean, it just kind of feels like, a slightly bigger budget version of it. It doesn't really feel like it's anything too crazy. Probably not helped by the fact that the movie itself, the whole thing just kind of feels like filler. Like, I understand that Korra exists and they already have a whole timeline mapped out, so pretty much this stuff is set in stone. But nothing really happens in this movie that feels like it needed to exist. Like, the biggest thing apparently is just that they eventually find um some like a certain species at the end of the movie. I don't even know if it's really worth hiding, but they eventually find Appa, like more sky bisons or whatever they're called. After all this stuff with them looking for artifacts and whatnot, and it's like, okay, well that's something, I guess. I don't know if this is really all that special, but yeah, nothing of value is gained from this, and nothing of value is lost from this. It's just another story with these characters, which if it were good, I probably wouldn't mind. But since it's just kind of boring and lacking, it's like I don't care. I'm not in the audience of people who actually enjoy the show anyways. Everything on it is just kind of lost on me. Like, I know the references, I know the characters, but the emotional connection and the emotional impact that I'm supposed to have is just non-existent. And as a result, this movie just lands as a big fat dud to me. It's not well paced. It's just like with the Mario movie, it's very rushed. Only difference is that there, I like the characters, and it's such a simple story to begin with that it's like, well, I can't really be too mad at this thing just kind of going from set piece to set piece, versus this where it is trying to be a much smarter project, and it is trying to tell a story regarding like differences and bigotry and whatnot, but there's just nothing there. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time.
Great, right?
Boring.
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel, subscribe, like and comment, ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/psycams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.